Sometimes you receive a document that is just all in black and white text, and it looks like a lot of text, and you're not really wanting to read something like that. You want something that your eye is more drawn to. So just to give you an example of how you can take a document and make it a little bit more readable to your audience, I went to the Resources tab in my tech, and then I scroll down to the Word section. And in here, you're going to find a file called Input Devices. And so I went ahead and I downloaded that to my computer. And you can see that it's just kind of blah, if I'm being quite honest. And I'm not really intrigued to want to read that. And so there are some things that we can do with section breaks, adding columns to a document, and using column breaks that will actually help to make it a little bit maybe more enjoyable for your reader to look at. And so the first thing I want to talk about is just using a continuous section break. If I turn my show hide on, I can see I have my normal paragraphs. If I wanted to put this document into columns, and under the Layout tab, I just chose Columns and 2. Notice how it puts the heading or the title of the document in a column, and that's really not what you would want to see. You would want to leave this alone up here. So just to kind of demonstrate that, if I put my insertion point before the key and keyboard, from the Layout tab, go to Breaks, and then I have two types. I have page breaks and section breaks. If I go ahead and put a continuous page break in there, it's going to insert a section break and start a new section on the same page. So when I click on that, I don't see anything happen in my document. A break is a non-printing character. So if I go back to the Home tab and click on my Show Hide button, I can see that I have a section break now in my document. So visually in my document, what does that mean? Well, I have basically two separate sections. I have this section above the break, and then I have this section below the break. So if I were to go to the Layout tab and choose Margins and say that I wanted to do narrow margins, 1/2 inch all the way around to my text, notice how it changed that part of the document. It left this alone because that's where the break is. Let me undo that. If I go into margins and let's say that I want to make them 2 inch left and right, and so I do wide margins and I click on that, notice how it adjusted just that section. So again, I will undo that. I'm going to go ahead and how do I get rid of a break then once I've added a break, I guess, in my document? What I want to do is go to Breaks. Actually, I'll just go to my Show Hide. Click on Show Hide, click on my break, and then press my Delete key, and it will delete that break from my document. So let's take this document and make it maybe just a little bit more appealing to the reader. So I'm going to turn my Show Hide off, and then I'm going to put my insertion point at the beginning of the first text in the document or the first paragraph, so before the Ian Engineers. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a column break in my document. So I will go to the Layout tab, go to Breaks, and choose Column Break. So see what that did? It's going to give me different columns. If I then go to column and change it from 1 to 2, this is what I end up with. So obviously I did not put that break in the right spot. So I'm going to go back to my Show Hide, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Column Break, and I'm going to press the Delete key and remove that. And then I'm going to go back to the Layout tab and go back to one column. So I need to figure out where does that break really need to be and what kind do I need to use. So now that I've demonstrated both of them to you, what I want to do is go to the Ian Engineers and to Layout, and I want to choose a continuous break. So I put that break in there. Then I can go to my columns and I can choose 2, and now I have the 2 separate columns in my document. So there are those 2 breaks that we will be working with. section break and column break. So after I have my columns set in my document, I can go in and format them. So I'm going to go back to the columns button under the layout tab and choose more columns. And when I do that, the dialog box appears and I can see that I have different presets. So if I wanted 3 columns, I could make it 3 columns, etc. So you can choose your number of columns a couple of different ways. I want you to notice that there's a check mark where it says equal column width, and this is by default. And it shows the column width as being 3 inches and then a ½ inch in between my columns. So if I go to change that column width, so if I increase one of them, it's going to increase both of them because it's going to keep equal column width. Notice it decreased that 1/10 from the spacing. This is because you only have 6½ inches to work with, because if this is an 8½ by 11 sheet of paper with 1-inch margins all the way around, 8½ minus a 1-inch margin and a 1-inch margin is 6½. So that's what I have to work with for my spacing in my document. So now that I have it set at 2 and I've changed my spacing measurement to 0.3, if I take this out just to show you and then I go to change my columns, notice how it adjusts them. So now my left is bigger than my right. It leaves the spacing alone. If I go back and click on equal column widths, it puts it back so that they're even. And it's applying it to this section. You can also apply it to this point forward or the whole document. The last item here is the line in between. That just puts a line in between your columns so that it makes it a little bit easier for your end user to read. If I go back to more columns and I want that line in between, I could say that I either want to apply it to this section or I can say from this point forward in my document. So that means if I go on to other pages that line will continue with me. So I'm going to go ahead and close that dialog box. And then I want to put a column break in my document. As I take a look here, so mouse, the paragraph with mouse starts on the left and then comes up and continues on the right. Maybe we can take a look at trying to balance that out a little bit more. So if I put my insertion point before the M in mouse and then go back under the layout tab and choose breaks, and this time I'm going to go ahead and choose column. So it's going to indicate that the text following the column break will begin in the next column. So it moves mouse up to the top of the next column. If I don't think that this is how my document should look, then I can turn my show hide on. I can go back in here, click on column break. Notice the difference between the two. Section break, it'll say continuous. It has 2 rows of dots. Column break just has 1 row of dots with the word in between. I'm going to click in that break, press the delete key, and then it will remove that for me. We're going to go ahead and just work with a little bit of spacing here. I'm going to select my entire document by doing a Control A, and then I'm going to choose a different font. I'll choose this. No, it won't let me click in my box. Let me just go down here to Constantia. And I'm going to make it 12 point instead of 11 point. So basically what I did was I changed it from a sans serif font to a serif font. So I've got a 12 point Constantia. I'm going to go to the end of my document. So we know that we learned if we do the Control plus the End key, it takes me to the very end of my document. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up into page layout and I'm going to choose breaks and I'm going to do another continuous break. So what I want you to see here is it balanced the text on the page. So it looks just like the previous page. Another thing to jazz up your document, which we've already talked about, I could go ahead and choose the heading under the Home tab, and go to my shading bucket, I could pick a color. Please be sure that when you're picking colors to highlight with, that you can read the text through them. Obviously, going and picking like this color, this dark orange, this dark green, you can't read the text through that. So please pick something that you can read your font through. We also learned how to use the paintbrush and to be able to apply formatting to different headings. One thing that I want to just reiterate is you can use the control key to select non-adjacent items. So if I press down the control key and then left click and drag through keyboard, through mouse, through trackball, and then through touchpad and touch screen, and then go up to my shading and choose a lighter shading to apply, it will apply them to all. So as I've said before, there's like no right or wrong way to do that. If I wanted to put page numbers on my document, I can go to my Insert tab and I could come over to my footer, or I could go to page number and I could say I want the page number at the bottom of the page, and then I could pick the type. So if I wanted a plain number 2, I can pick that. It'll put page numbers at the bottom of my document. So really all I'm doing is going through and making it a little bit more readable for my audience. We do have a technique, let me close the header footer, called drop cap. If I highlight the Ian Engineer and then go to my design tab, I may not find it on my it's under my insert tab. I apologize. Under the insert tab, you see drop cap, and it's going to do just that. It's going to drop the cap so many lines of text. So if I click on that and do a dropped through live preview, you can see what the Ian Engineers looks like. If I do it in the margin, yeah, that's probably not where I want it to be. It doesn't look appropriate for the document. So even if I choose drop cap, I can see it's dropped at 3 lines. I could go back to the options and then I could change the font. So if I wanted it to be a different font, I could go out here and I could pick something different to put in there. And how many lines? 3 lines is pretty good. Maybe you want it more lines of text. So it's dropped that many lines of text. The other option that you see in there is like if I were to pick this Edwardian script maybe, and it looks like that, see how the text covers it up? I can go in here and say that I want that to be, so far away from the rest of the text so that you can read it. So that's an example of a drop cap. You usually only see those the beginning of a chapter in a book. It's nothing that I see all that often. The scripting is more like your fairy tale. Just a regular letter is just to make it stand out. The last thing in this particular document that I want to talk about is your drop cap. And so, or not your drop cap, your hyphenating. So under the layout tab, you have hyphenation. And so this is just where words break. So if I'm at the beginning of my document and I think that I need some words to break so that it fits differently, if by default it's none. If you choose automatic, notice how it shifted the document because it put some hyphens in here. And there may be some places that it's not appropriate. I'll undo that and then go to hyphenation and choose manual. This gives you the control to say, okay, do I want the hyphen to go there? If you do, you say yes. Do you want it between common? If you don't, then you say no, and it skips that one. So that's just a way to be able to go in, and you notice when we did that it added or it shifted how the text appeared within the columns. Quite honestly, I don't necessarily think that hyphenation is necessary. But in some documents, especially if you're trying to get it to fit on a page, that's when you would use that. So if you have any questions on doing some formatting with a document, please don't hesitate to ask.